Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Mr. Wells.
We appreciate all the support as we've been plowing through these off-season breakdowns. There was a comment from WRX Anthony on TikTok on our video about Detroit, the Detroit Pistons, and he said, "Need Zucci to finish this art project." That's elite ball knowledge right there. That's Houston Rockets 10-day contract legend, and I know recently he's been going viral on TikTok. So, what are your thoughts on that quick comment?
Yeah, I mean, he is a big that I guess kind of fits the type of description, for their needs, right? Because presumably, if all of his pros and cons kind of work themselves out, right, he's a big that's supposed to be able to stretch the floor, and they need some more outside shooting. That's such a funny thing on TikTok and social media where you can just find highlight reels of all of these players from different eras, including guys that aren't necessarily stars or superstars, right? Like you like people have reels of like Quincy Acey and Jordan Crawford, right? All of these players that people kind of remember from like the 2010s
Yeah.
or late 2000s or whatever, but it always is just kind of a treat to see them because it's always like, yeah, I do remember those games or those guys. And like sometimes in 2K, you could take those players and try to turn them into 99 overalls. It was always really fun.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's all in good fun and good memories. So, before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so next up after, the Detroit Pistons, so shout out to everybody, who, liked and liked and subscribed off the Pistons content, right? We appreciate that and continue to do so.
Yeah.
Now we're moving on through the Central Division to the Milwaukee Bucks, right? So we're kind of going from a team that didn't have a lot of expectations and somehow failed to meet those expectations to a team that actually did have high expectations and failed to meet them, right? The Milwaukee Bucks were one of the more disappointing teams of last year, right? Obviously, they made the big deal, right? The big trade for Damian Lillard, right? Shockingly, right? Because, initially when Lillard requested his trade, we didn't really expect him to go to Milwaukee. We thought he was going to Miami. And then he didn't. He ended up going to Milwaukee in that massive deal, right? And Milwaukee sent out Jrue Holiday, right? Who was their starting point guard during their championship run. And, it just felt like, the Bucks the year before had a pretty disappointing year where they had a great regular season. And then, of course, in the playoffs, right, Giannis gets hurt. And then they get eliminated in the first round as the number one seed. And, yeah, completely screwed up our championship map, right? Because that was my pick to win the title that year. But either way, moving on from that, right? Obviously, Lillard, very different player from Jrue Holiday. We talked about this last offseason when the deal happened, right? Obviously, more of a scorer, that can also run the floor, not really a defensive guy. And, again, like his numbers, they took a dip from the year before, right? Obviously, he had a great year the year before, and you weren't necessarily expecting the same statistical performance just because of the fact that playing next to Giannis, now it's not his team, not quite as many touches. But, I think what was kind of rough was the efficiency, right? He averaged 24 and 7, right, which is still good. That's still pretty good. But he shot 42 from the field and 35 from 3. 35 from 3 isn't bad, right? But, 42 isn't great. And then, also you compare that to the year before where he shot 46 from the field, 37 from 3, and he averaged over 30 a game. Which, again, you expect the points to go down because of the fact that he's playing next to, other really good offensive players. And our concerns about this team, were pretty apparent, I think, from the beginning of the season onwards, right? We were concerned about the team's ability to be, a competent championship level defense. And, for the first stretch of the season, they were awful on defense. They were one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA, right? They got better over the course of the season, right? But, remember what had to happen, right? They had Adrian Griffin as their head coach, right? After they fired Mike Budenholzer. And it didn't work, right? The players didn't really seem like they loved him all that much, even though they were actually winning games, funny enough. But they fired him. Then they brought in Doc Rivers to try to shore things up. And their defense did improve. But, at the same time, I don't know. It still, to me, didn't really feel like they were really going to be able to make a deep run because it just I don't know. It just didn't feel like everything was there. They were 19th defensively over the course of the season, but again, part of that was skewed because of the fact that they were so bad early on in the season on defense. But then obviously, right at the end of the season, regular season, Giannis gets hurt, has a calf injury, and he doesn't play for the postseason. Right? They go against the Pacers and they lose in 6. Right? So kind of impressive that they were able to get it to 6 without Giannis, including winning a game without Giannis and Lillard. But you could tell that it just wasn't enough. And now you're going into this upcoming season where the core guys, another year older, they did bring in some solid help, right, through free agency. They brought in Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., and DeLon Wright, right, as the kind of their 3, main, free agency signings, and that's solid, right? Because those are, good NBA players, right? So that makes the bottom half of their roster just better, right? Because they're minimum contract rotational guys last season, right? It was what was it? Patrick Beverly, Jay Crowder, and I guess Danilo Gallinari, right? And these guys are just better,
Yeah.
right? They're just better than those guys. So that's an upgrade. But I still feel like the core, right, the foundation of the team, I just don't think, it just feels like the East, the title may have passed them by a little bit because even though Giannis himself is obviously still elite, right, the rest of the group is, starting to get up there in terms of age, right? Obviously Lillard, right, he's 33, 34 years old,
34, yeah.
right? Yeah, exactly, 34, right? You have Brook Lopez, 35, going to be 36, right? Middleton going to be 33. So and that's a problem, right? Because obviously it just those guys it feels like are kind of on the downside of their careers, right? Like Brook Lopez was still good last year, right? He averaged 12 and a half, 5 rebounds, 2.5 blocks, 49 from the field, 37 from 3, and he stepped up in the playoffs, right? He gave him 18 and 4 a game, right? Obviously, a lot that was all without Giannis, so it's pretty clear that those guys were able to step up when needed, right? Middleton averaged 25 and 9 and 5, right? 48 from the field, 36 from 3. It's just the problem is that again, can you trust those guys to be healthy when it counts? And can you trust that there isn't a drop off from those guys because of the fact that, even with a Chris Middleton, he had off-season surgery again, right? It seems like every season he's had to have some type of procedure on something. I think this time he had a procedure on both of his ankles, right? So he's supposed to be fine going into the season, but it's just something to think about. Lillard, right? He didn't tear it obviously, which is great. But he hurt his Achilles in the playoffs, so I'm sure he probably needed some time to rest that up. It was just kind of a nightmarish year for them, I think, last season. So I think that there's reasons to be higher on the team. I know that there are some people that feel like that now they're kind of going from overrated to underrated just because of the fact that the minimum contract signing should help improve them and make them better. I just still don't necessarily know if it's going to be enough to be able to, overcome, some of the teams in the Eastern Conference. Because obviously, like the Bucks, to be fair, they've already won a title. So similar to the Celtics, they've proven that they can be a championship group. And outside of Lillard, it's still a lot of the other same guys. But, at the same time, it doesn't feel like that group has really improved, right? Like the Celtics have improved, since, they went to the finals in 2022, right? And obviously they improved and they won a title, right? Obviously Philly's improved, even though, Embiid's track record isn't the same as Giannis's, but the team is better, right? The Knicks improved. So, a lot of the other teams in the Eastern Conference have improved as well, because the Bucks, I think, did improve, but I think the other teams' improvements were a little bit more significant, and it felt like they may have already been better. Again, to be fair, I'm willing to give the Bucks the benefit of the doubt because they've just had some bad luck the last 2 seasons where, Giannis in both playoff runs just was not healthy, right? Like in this playoff series, he wasn't available at all, right? At least he played the year before, but even then he still missed a couple of games. So, that's just tough. So I don't necessarily know, you know, if these improvements are enough to turn them from, what they were last year to can they actually win the championship? Because I still don't feel like what we saw last season, at least in the regular season, to me felt like a real championship team. I just don't feel like they were good enough. They were 49 and 33, which isn't bad at all. They were third in the East. They were sixth on offense and 19th on defense. But I still feel like the defense has got to be better. I mean, I just I don't like. I know that obviously if you're a top 5 offensive team, right, your I guess floor for what you have to be on defense is lower, but I still need to be shown that a team can be, a below average defense and still be able to win the title. We just haven't seen it. I mean, and like I said, the second half of the year they were better, but I think you have to be sustainable over the course of the entire season. I don't think you can just turn it on for, 2 months and then all of a sudden, you win the title. I think say if you look at the last several champions, right? All of them had great regular seasons, right? You had the Celtics, right? They had the best record in the NBA, 64 wins. The Denver Nuggets, yeah, they took 2 months off, but they still were number one in the Western Conference. So clearly they had a lot of time as one of the, top teams in the league. And their defense was never, in the 20s, right? I think they finished 12th, right? You had the Warriors, right? The year they won the title, right? They were the 3 seed and they would have finished higher, but they had injuries the latter part of the season, right? Year before that, Milwaukee, funny enough, right? When they won the title. And then obviously before that, the Lakers. So again, you look at the starting five, you know, it's going to be the same other than the fact that, of course, Malik Beasley comes out and Garrett Trent Jr. comes in, right? And he, I would say, probably is a better player than Malik Beasley. Shooting wise, right, they're on par. Trent, obviously, I think for his career, I think shoots better from three, right, than Malik Beasley does. But, I think in terms of like what they are as shooters, similar tier. But I think Trent Jr. is a better defender. But even defensively, it's I still don't think he's a great defender, but he can probably be better than Malik Beasley, right? He gives you more size, gives you more length. So I think that's where you probably look at that as a positive. And then obviously off the bench, right? You still have Pat Connaughton, still have Bobby Portis, and then you'll have and be bringing in Torian Prince and DeLon Wright. So I think that's an upgrade for the second unit. Andre Jackson Jr., can he give them anything in year two? He played a little bit last year. And he flashed some moments where, he had some effectiveness, but again, we know that Doc Rivers doesn't tend to play a lot of the younger guys, but he's also not, a 19-year-old, right? He's going to be 23 going into the season. So, if he can kind of flash anything, that would help because that would give you, a younger athletic guy. He shot 37% from three last year, albeit very limited attempts, right? Less than one attempt per game, but the minutes were so low. So, that's where, there's room for improvement there if he can actually give them something. But I don't know. I still don't necessarily feel like what they did was enough to win the title. But I can see somebody at least making the case of if they're healthy, with that second, with the additional guys that they added, they should be better than a first round exit. It's hard to really, bank on them being healthy because it's been the same script, right, for the last few seasons where like Middleton's been hurt the last few seasons. Um, and then, obviously Lillard's been getting some injuries the last few years. And then even Giannis, right, who's obviously been great, during the regular season and the postseason, but he's kind of missed some time. Not really in the regular season, but it feels like it's carried its way into the playoffs where he's out for some of these playoff games where they really need him, and his workload I think is just way too high. Obviously, when you have him, your floor is going to be like a top 3 seed just because of how good he is, especially in the East. But unless he has like unless he's even better than last year, and then maybe you get a bounce back year from Lillard, and then good health from a lot of these guys, and then maybe one of these minimum contract guys really pop off. I just feel like that may be a little bit too much to ask. So, I give them a B plus for what they did in the offseason because I do think that the minimum contract signings are good, but I still feel like the foundation is just not quite there, and I just don't know if I can, go back to trusting the Bucks, which is weird because again, unlike Philly and New York, right, and some of these other teams, like they've already won a title with most of the core intact. Out, of course, aside from Drew Holiday, it's Damian Lillard, but it just feels like that they're kind of at best going sideways and at worst kind of on a downward trajectory compared to these other teams where not only are those teams getting better, but I think their success may be a little bit more sustainable because their core of guys are all, good and, a little bit younger. And there's, maybe some upward movement for some of those teams, including things like trades possibly down the line and whatnot. But, for the Bucks, outside of Giannis, I just don't know. That's kind of a problem because again, I still expect most of these guys to be really good, but at some point, some of these guys are going to take a step back, right? Like it's possible Lillard could be a little bit worse. It's possible that Brook Lopez could be a little bit worse. It's possible Middleton could be a little bit worse. And if any of those guys are even a little bit worse, then you don't really have much of a chance at all. If I'm going to be honest, because you still need at least some level of consistent All NBA production. And again, to be fair, like Lillard in the postseason, did as much as he could, right, to keep the Bucks' hopes alive, right? He averaged 31 and 5 a game, but he's and shot 42 from 3, even though he shot 42 from the field. But again, that's without Giannis. So I mean, again, you need both of them. So that's the tough part. Is I think you need some better luck in terms of health, but I don't know. I know that there are people that are higher on this Bucks team, and I think they could, and I think that they should be better than they were last season. Like I think they should be better than a first round exit. But would it surprise me if they still didn't win the title, right? And then maybe kind of their ceiling is second round? Not really, but they might be able to do better than that. But I think it's less likely.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is one of the tougher teams to talk about because you have a weird situation where Giannis is a top 3 player, but you look at the core surrounding him and it doesn't really feel like a top 3 team in the NBA at all. Maybe, in the East, but not in the NBA as a whole. But I think, you do kind of have to baseline compare this team to what they looked like when they won the title. And it's very different in terms of, very different philosophy, very different, personnel as well. No Drew Holiday, and I think that's the main thing that's really hurting
Right.
them. Chris Middleton
Perimeter,
hasn't. What'd you say?
no perimeter D.
Exactly, and Chris Middleton has not really looked like himself. From that title year, and I think the interesting thing is like he looked pretty dang good in the postseason last
Yeah.
year. Really legacy kind of stuff. But I just don't know if he can do it again. And it's not so much the fit. I think it's more so about like the productivity. What kind of efficiency are we looking at? What's the gel gonna really feel like? Because I think they have the potential to win the title. It's just I can't put my faith in them. And I'm
Right.
not gonna. I think that I'm maybe a little bit higher on them than I was last year. Last year I was
Yeah.
I had them in the fraud category, but now that I've seen it, and to be fair, like when teams get kind of like a superstar like Damian Lillard, and pair him with a guy like Giannis, I don't really think people expect them to go crazy in the first year.
Mhm.
Because it's not like it was a super team or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what people hope for, but that's not always what happens.
it,
But it depends because
yeah,
we've seen teams, kind of gel year one, but it
sure.
doesn't always happen.
Yeah, so I think the harsh reality was, they just came up very short in terms of those championship aspirations, which is okay. That's fine, but this year I think is kind of like make or break for this deal. I think in terms of how we look at the Lillard deal down the line and things of that nature. Like you already talked about, Dame's aging. Brook Lopez is aging as well. Middleton aging. So a couple of these guys are a little bit past their prime. Um, and with Giannis, like I said in the short, I think, MVP candidate, top 3 player in the NBA, but can they get past the first round? I think they can if he's there and healthy. And, not 100%, but, as healthy as can be. Then, yeah, I think they can get past the first round. But, off season wise, I don't think they acquired enough help to make me, sit there and say this is a title favorite. But
Mhm.
I will say, keeping, Doc Rivers around, you can kind of see that they're formulating a little bit of an identity, grabbing some defensive guys. That's good. That's a positive. Just not enough for me, considering, look at what other teams in the East did. Look at Boston. Look at New York, Philly, even. I just don't think this offseason was too crazy for them. I think it was a smart offseason, more so than like a offseason where it makes me feel like, they made a whole bunch of difference making moves. Like you already
Right.
talked about it. Gary Trent Jr., quality player, and you got him for a steal, for the veteran minimum. That's awesome. And then bring in Torian Prince still on right as well. That's cool. It's just nothing like McCall Bridges, nothing like Paul George. So that's kind of where I can't really rate this higher than a C. For me personally, I think it was an average off season, by that regard, like I said, nothing earth shattering, but my confidence in Giannis hasn't, wavered at all. I think, if he's the best player in the NBA, then yeah, they can win a title. But is that going to happen considering what we saw, in the past couple of years with the injuries and stuff like that, and the whole team really with injuries? So that's kind of where I sit on it. And, I don't know. This is a really tough team to talk about and gauge because I think you can see, why people are saying they're a little underrated because the comeback story does sound really cool. You look at all the accomplishments of all the core guys on this team and you're like, yeah, this could be a really good, team going into the season. But then you kind of look at what happened in the past couple of years and you're like, I'm not really a believer. So I kind of need to see it, then I'll believe it. That's the kind of philosophy that I'm running with this team.
Yeah. And like I said, I think there's reasons as we laid out to be more optimistic about the Bucks compared to last season because of the extra additions that they made given the resources they had to work with, right? Because again, it's another team that has a lot of constraints because of the CBA, right? Where they're a tax team, so they can't necessarily just, go out and sign anybody. But being able to get those players for the minimum, right? Like you said, those are steals. It's just again, is that enough to necessarily put them over the top? And again, like I said, the other reason to be optimistic is the injuries in the playoffs, and you still went 6, against the Pacers, right? Like, you can make a, you can probably make a really strong case that like, hey, if Giannis were healthy, right, they could win, they could have won that.
They would have won that series. I think everybody knows that too.
Right, because until it was pretty apparent that Giannis wasn't going to play, I was picking the Bucks. But once it became apparent that he wasn't going to play, it was like, well, I can't really pick him. So, but again, the Pacers aren't the same necessarily as the Celtics or the Knicks or the Sixers. And I know the Pacers beat the Knicks, but they beat up Knicks team.
Very, very battered.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. But regardless,
especially
that's my
the Knicks
question.
now. Holy.
Right, exactly. And that's the problem, I think, for the Bucks is just, again, I know that they had a nightmarish year last year, but, how much better realistically is the ceiling for that team? Right? That's the question because I like you and I both have felt, I don't think, even though I think they made quality moves, like you said, I think a smart offseason, it's not like they, panicked and then said, we need to blow it up. We need to move Middleton. We need to move Lopez. We need to move all these guys. They didn't do that, right? And I think that's the smart move because of the fact that, the window is pretty small at this point. Like you said, this year is probably it, where if you can't get it done this year, then then after that, you're probably going to have to blow it up because then at that point, everybody is going to continue to be a year older and you're going to continue to have the issues of how can we realistically add and improve to this roster while everyone else continues to get better. So, I just don't think it's going to happen. Like, I just don't necessarily think that they're going to win the title. And if that's the case, maybe this is looking too forward, but what happens, say if they end up disappointing again, right? Like, what's the most likely scenario if they end up, having a bad year again?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of glad you brought this up because I think their future isn't too bleak, they have, I think, let's see. They have a 2026 first round pick. They have a 2028 first round pick, 2030 first round pick, 2031 first round pick, and 2031 second round pick. So they kind of have a little bit of a treasure trove. They've traded away a lot of picks, which is interesting as well. So I think there's potential for them to use that in like a, in-season trade or something like that, down the line. But I think if everything kind of goes wrong, I think we all know who's going to take, the brunt of it. And I think it's probably going to be Dame, unfortunately. So that's kind of... No, it's not going to be Bobby Portis. It's not going to be Brooke Lopez. Not going to be Gary Trent. It's going to probably be Damian Lillard because people are going to say, well, we brought you here to win a championship and you couldn't deliver. So that's why I think it's going to take a lot. It's really a lot to ask, I think, of Dame to kind of rewind the clock and be, he's already elite, but, I think he has to be, top 3 point guard in the East. And I don't know if he's that anymore. I don't know. So that's kind of where I would look at is probably the Dame situation. You're probably gonna have to move on from him. Obviously, I think Middleton will be gone as well. I think they're just gonna blow it up. I don't think, and that's another factor. Giannis could probably ask out too if he really wanted to, and I think he's been hinting at that for a long time. But he
Right.
finally kind of got what he wanted, and it hasn't really gone too well. Although 1 year under the belt, so I think they'll probably give it like 2 or 3 more years until they're you know blaring the red alarms. But like I said, they have the draft picks to kind of move um, you know, for another guy or, move on from somebody. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna blow
And
it up if it doesn't work.
right, and like you have Giannis, so you can
Yeah.
either quote unquote move pieces around, switch pieces around, and
Yeah.
kind of switch it up, or like you said, the nuclear option, I guess, is if he asks out. But I don't know. And like I said, don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole,
Yeah.
but it is something you do have to think about just because of the fact that, again, I don't think, especially with the new CBA in general, the windows are smaller, but this team's window feels, incredibly small compared to, like, say, the Celtics window. I know, obviously, now people feel like their window is a little bit shorter now because of the new CBA, right? But they still, have, I think, a longer window than Milwaukee
Yeah.
just
Agreed.
because that, like, their stars are young, even though their veteran guys are a little bit older, right? Your two main guys are entering their primes.
But the vets
So,
can be replaced too. I feel like there's quality.
Mhm.
There's gonna be quality, guys
Right.
that do similar things of that caliber down the line that can easily be moved.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's the main thing, right? And then like with the Knicks, right? Their window, we'll see because we have to see what that Knicks team looks like.
Yeah.
But their window in theory should be, a few years, right?
Yeah.
Just because it's not like they have, guys on their roster that are 34,
Sure.
35,
Sure.
that play major rotational minutes, right? It's like, a roster mainly full of guys that are kind of in their mid late 20s.
Sure.
So, and then obviously Philly, obviously Embiid's 30, right? But he's still, in that Giannis Jokic, superstar tier. And then also you have the other guys around him, like Tyrese Maxey, who's a young guy. Obviously, Paul George is older, but you have Maxey and others. So that's the problem I think for the Bucks is that, like you said, they did have a smart offseason, and I think the additions were quality additions. I just still don't necessarily feel like that it's enough to be able to, you know, truly make a difference. Like, I think they'll be better than last year for sure. I think they will do better than a first round exit, particularly if, these guys are healthy, because
Hmm.
that's the main issue. In addition to, I think, the construction of the roster, but still, the guys got to be healthy regardless.
Yep.
But outside of that, I don't know. So, if we look at their, over unders, yeah, their over unders, according to a lot of these betting sites, have them at 50. 50 and a half, 51 and a half, which is more in line than what I saw initially. So, yeah. So, what do you think of that, right? And again, we've talked about this multiple times. We've talked about over-unders where we don't bet. We're not giving betting advice. It's just kind of a guide to kind of look at these teams and kind of see, how Vegas kind of views these teams.
I'm going under. I know
Okay.
I know that might kind of contradict what I was saying about the team being better because I think they went 49 and
Yeah.
33 last season.
Right.
Um, but looking around, a lot of analysts and people are just not super high on this team. Like from the mainstream people, like ESPN, they predicted Milwaukee to finish fourth in the East, and then NBA.com, one of their advanced stats reporters, ranked the Bucks fifth in the East, in terms of
Mm.
power rankings and stuff. So I think there is a lot of skepticism, not necessarily, like I said, about the fit. It's more so about the ability,
Right.
productivity, and availability. I think availability is probably going to be their number one, factor that they're going to be fighting for or fighting against. So that's kind of why I'm going under because I just don't foresee, Middleton playing, a whole bunch of games. I don't. Well, he's going to play a lot, I think, but like I don't think he plays over like maybe 60.
Mm-hmm.
Brooke Lopez maybe misses some time. I think Dame will miss some time. I think Giannis is going to be an Iron Man, but yeah, I can for sure see those three missing time. And if that's the
Mm-hmm.
case, I don't think they have the depth to kind of replace any of those guys. in all honesty. So that's kind of why I think they're going to go under 50. I could see them
Yeah,
going like 48, really. Like, it's not like
yeah,
a severe drop off. It's not going to be like 30 or something like that.
yeah. Regular season last year, Lillard and Giannis played 73 games,
Yeah.
and then Lopez played 79.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good. And then
Yeah.
Malik Beasley played 79. The only odd man out is Middleton. He
Yep.
played 55 games, but you still have most of the starters played 70 plus games, and you still only got to 49 wins. And some of that was they had a horrible, you know, close to the season, right? Where
Yeah.
they were kind of just losing all these games left and right to teams that they shouldn't have lost to. And some of that was right where Giannis, I think, had gotten
Yeah.
hurt,
They
right?
closed 17 and 19 on the season. That's horrible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and because they were losing games before Giannis was hurt. I know that I think there were a couple that Lillard was out, but they lost some games where I think they lost, they got blown out by the Knicks. They lost to the Raptors, they lost to the, G League Grizzlies. I think they lost to the Wizards, right? So, the double overtime loss to LA without LeBron. I mean, a lot of really bad losses, in that stretch. And, again, just like in the West, you're not going to be able to have, a long stretch of games where you're just kind of mediocre, right? Like 17 and 19, that's a lot of games. I mean, that's what 36 games. So that's almost half the season. So that means during most of the second half of the season, they were below 500. So, that's a problem. That's something that can't happen again. And again, that's with most of the guys being healthy for the majority of the season outside of Chris Middleton, of course. So, and then, of course, you always have the world where maybe Middleton plays more games, but then somebody else doesn't play like 70 plus games,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like Lillard could play like 65 or something like that, or, some other random thing happens, because that's just what happens when it comes to, the NBA and
Yeah.
sports in general, is that it's very difficult to be healthy for an entire season. And the teams that are better at that, right, those are the teams that generally speaking are going to win, which,
Yeah.
sounds kind of lame, but I mean,
It's the
sometimes that
truth.
kind of is, yeah, sometimes that kind of is how it is. I feel like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of with you where I feel like it's probably under, but like you said, the only issue is that it's just so tough because 50 games, I mean, they won just one fewer game last year. So if they're going to be better, they should win more than 49 games. But I think, like you said, the problem is that the rest of the top of the East got better. So there's going to be, some teams where maybe that might have been a win before, but it might be a little bit more difficult now. Although, to be fair, the bottom of the East is definitely worse. So
Yeah.
that's where you'll be able to pile up. But, again, if you didn't win 50 games, that probably means you didn't necessarily do that amazing against, horrible teams.
Right.
Obviously, I'm sure, their record against below 500 teams wasn't terrible. But, again, as we talked about, as I just mentioned, right, that second half of the season, where they went below 500 over the last 36 games, there was some bad teams in that mix that I mentioned. You heard me list some of them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the problem. So I just
And
don't
they struggled
necessarily
on the
know.
road, too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to have to be better. I
Yep.
mean, again, if you want to win 50 plus games, you got to be really good at home. You got to beat bad teams, and then you have to be at least okay on the road. You
Yeah.
can't be terrible.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be, like 10 games below 500 on the road. You got to, I think, at worst be 500. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, is that reasonable?
That's fair.
But yeah, but with an older team, sometimes being good on the road is a little bit tough. Like,
Yeah.
say last year, or 2 seasons ago, right? That Warriors team, the year coming off the title, right? They were a terrible road team, right? Where
Yeah.
it just, if it was a road game, it was basically a loss. Last year they were better on the road, but then they were bad at home. But I mean, that team wasn't even as good as the Bucks, anyways. But you know what I mean. Just
Mhm.
from the perspective of when you have a team that's kind of comprised of an older group of guys, the road games tend to be a little bit tougher, just because that's travel, right? That's more mileage on all of these guys, and it just makes a game where a random team, in the middle of the season on the road, it makes that type of game much tougher.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
that, yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. Like I said, this team is a little bit hard to get a beat on in terms of regular season wins. But, obviously, this is a team where, in theory, it should be a championship or bust team, right? This is different from Detroit, where, Can you at least look like you're a play-in caliber-ish team,
Yep.
right? With the Bucks, you got to look like a championship team, and it has to look like that right away. And like you said, it's a good point that you bring up where, a lot of these type of significant changes with a team, it doesn't tend to net you a title the first year. But funny enough, the guy that they acquired before netted them a championship in their first year. That was Drew Holiday, right? So, obviously, like, it felt like it may have been time to kind of make a change, and that is what they did. They acquired Damian Lillard, but do you feel like it was? I mean, I guess to be fair, you can't really completely write it off until I think after this season.
Yeah,
But
that's what I was saying.
yeah. So I guess maybe I should probably hold on that question. But I mean, does it feel like the Lillard trade was a mistake so far? Because again, I don't even necessarily know if it's completely him. Although I do think that the numbers that he gave you, I think, are a little bit disappointing, at least in the regular season. I think playoff wise, the numbers were fine,
Yeah.
but you expected that without Giannis.
Yeah, I just feel like it's kind of tough to watch a team be successful when they do a 180 in their identity shift in terms of bringing guys in and moving other pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like this was a free agent signing. This was a trade, So, pieces were given up to acquire Damian Lillard. And yeah, like you said, the result wasn't too great. And I think it's on the team as a whole, it's on the organization as a whole, for not maximizing this opportunity. Because, you acquired the guy and then the coach is gone. Then you bring in another coach who doesn't have the greatest reputation at this point, and it just piled on. And then Giannis being hurt, then Dame goes down in the playoffs as well. I think the only
Right.
redeeming thing from the season is probably, okay, Chris Middleton still has some,
Yeah.
juice left, for the playoffs potentially
Right.
if he's healthy.
Yeah, and that's where I think playoffs wise, like, you could see a difference because
Yeah.
if they're healthy, then obviously Middleton goes from number 2 to number 3. So instead of we got to put our best, perimeter wing defender on Middleton, now we got to put our best defender on Lillard, right?
Yeah.
Assuming the guys that aren't bigs,
Yep.
right? And then that leaves Middleton, room to be able to kind of do his thing. So
Right.
that's and that's the theory of why you get Lillard anyways, is because then you have 3 guys that are all really good offensive players. You have Giannis and Lopez as your cleanup guys defensively. It just, the downgrade, I think, going from Holiday to Lillard, which is not a surprise or a hot take, it's very significant. And you just don't have anyone else in the backcourt to make up for it. Like Gary Trent Jr. is going to have to make up for that. And, with the personnel around him, maybe. But I mean, like, you do have Giannis. That's a good starting point. And you have Lopez. Those are 2 good starting points defensively because they're both big, they're both long, and they can block shots. But I don't know. I just don't necessarily know if switching from Malik Beasley to Gary Trent Jr. can improve the starting defense.
Yeah.
But, I guess it's a guy that could probably close games for you a little bit more consistently, and you feel better about it than Beasley just
Yeah.
because of, I think, size.
Yeah, I agree. It makes your backcourt less vulnerable, but at the same time, they can still be attacked. It's not like they're
Right.
invincible,
And that's the problem because, like, say against Boston, who's guarding Tatum, who's guarding Brown, and I don't know. Not in that. I don't see anybody in that starting 5. I guess Giannis is going to have to guard one of them, but
Probably
then that
Tatum.
pulls him away. Yeah, but that pulls him away from the basket, and then the only guy left is Lopez. And you probably need a second guy that can kind of move his feet down there. Obviously, he can play drop, but
Yeah.
I think him by himself is not quite as impactful defensively.
Yeah, agreed.
Compared to him and Giannis
Yeah,
together.
look at both their numbers when they're both down there, like elite. Like defensively they're awesome, but you kind of
Right.
separate them. I mean, Giannis can hold his own, Lopez can hold his own in some situations, but
Right.
I think if we're talking Celtics here, they would find a way
Yeah.
to pick that apart easily.
And it's tough because you saw like a Miles Turner, right, pull Lopez away from the rim,
Mm-hmm.
and then he also is a really good athlete, compared to Lopez. Now, Porzingis,
Yeah.
right, not quite as athletic as Turner, but he's a good athlete especially for his size, and he's taller than Lopez,
Right.
and he can shoot well. So I feel like that's a tougher matchup. So, I mean, regular season wise, they've actually done pretty good against the Celtics, but who cares about how it looks in the regular season?
Right.
Obviously, you still got to win regular season games, but we've seen at times where teams look good against the team in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, it's a different story. Look at
Tell
Phoenix
me
and
about it.
last year.
We'll never live that down, will we?
No, we won't. We literally won't. I mean, because that was just I don't even know how to describe that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess of the young guys, right? To be the Bucks did draft a couple of guys, right? They did draft AJ Johnson, right? And then after that, was it Tyler Smith? Yeah, Tyler
Yeah,
Smith.
Tyler Smith. Yeah.
So yeah, Tyler Smith, I think that's the G League Ignite guy, right? And then AJ Johnson came from overseas. I mean, those guys, I mean, to be fair, they actually had good summer league showings,
Very good.
but I don't and I think the Johnson one, everybody thought that was a horrible pick because of his numbers overseas. But he had a good summer league showing, as did Tyler Smith. And I think people liked Tyler Smith anyways, but I still don't think they're gonna get regular season minutes. Those are probably G League guys. I think it would have been a little bit nicer to have picked guys that I think are coming in with already kind of well-defined skill sets instead of guys that are probably more so projects. But, again, like it doesn't make or break your season, but those type of moves can certainly help. So like I wouldn't have picked those guys, but they could make us look stupid in a few seasons. I just don't necessarily expect them to really do anything year one. Those guys, like I said, probably will be end of the bench, more than likely G League guys.
Yeah, I mean, year one, I'm not expecting too much from either of them. Just show out in the G League. That's
hmm
really kind of all that I think is going to happen. You already hinted at it. You already talked about it. Every time we talk about Doc Rivers, we always say he never plays young guys. I don't think they'll be scratching the rotation. But
Yeah.
yeah, it would have helped to maybe get, one of those guys who could potentially crack the rotation, maybe like a Ryan Dunn, something like that. But at the end of the day, it is what it is.
Right.
At least they might be like potential guys that could be moved down the line. I don't know, or potential guys that you could call up from the G League if they actually do turn out to be good. Because I think the issue is AJ Johnson is so raw, and he's super young too. So
Yeah. 20.
yeah, like I don't think he plays in the regular
Yeah.
season too much.
And then I guess, the other guys that aren't rookies,
Mm-hmm.
do we get anything out of them? Right? Do you get anything out of Marshawn Beauchamp? Do you get anything
Forgot
out
he
of
was even on the team. Man.
yeah, because he played at times.
Yeah.
Do you get anything out of him? Do you get anything out of AJ Green? Do you get anything out of Chris Livingston or Andre Jackson Jr.? I kind of, talked about like if Andre Jackson Jr. could pop, and I think if one of the other guys could pop, that would help. But I mean, I don't even know if these guys are really good. Because
Yeah.
we saw Beauchamp play early in the season for the Bucks, and then he just kind of stopped.
Yeah.
And it feels like in terms of some of his tools, that's another type of player that would be helpful for them. But I don't know if he's actually, you know, a real rotational player for them. I mean,
Yeah.
in the minutes he got, he looked fine in the regular season, but he just never, once Doc came in, he just kind of stopped playing.
Yeah. That's tough because I feel like all these guys could be rotational guys on maybe a different team, but I think
Mhm.
for the Bucks and what their vision is and what their aspirations are, I just don't think they can contribute. I just think they're a little bit too young, a little too raw,
Mhm.
um, and really just don't fit the identity. Maybe I mean, like they have some athleticism to them. I think that's the
Yeah,
cool thing.
and
And
that's what they're missing. That's one of the things they're missing outside of
yeah,
Giannis. They don't have a lot of athletic guys.
yeah, and athleticism can translate into defense. We're advocates for that, but in order for that to kind of happen, you have to have IQ, and I think you have to have a good sense of ball and stuff like that. So I don't know, like, and it's hard to gauge because, like you said, there's not a lot of film, there's not a lot of tape, um, and in the minutes that we saw them, it wasn't anything crazy,
Right.
and I'm not trying to like down them or anything, but it's just the reality. I haven't seen enough. And granted, you're only kind of we can only see based on the opportunities that they've been given. And to be fair, they haven't been given opportunities. So I would like
Right.
to see, them crack the rotation and be guys that can help out, kind of like Christian Brown-esque, something like that. I don't know.
Right.
But, that's on the coaching staff and maybe that's on the players. Maybe they haven't really shown that they deserve an opportunity. I don't know. But either way, I think, they should be given an opportunity.
Yeah, I just feel like I think ideally, if you could move say, one of the second unit guys and maybe turn them, like if you could move Pat Connaughton plus something and turn that into something, that would be nice. But I mean, how much can you really get? Because he still only makes 9 million. So then you need to add, you know, another guy that makes some type of money. Because outside of the starting five and Portis, everyone else, doesn't really make a whole lot. So I mean, you don't really have a ton of guys to really move. So I just don't necessarily know, where their heads are at in terms of those guys on the roster. I don't really know about that. But I guess kind of, one last, a couple of last points to look at. So just kind of I guess a deeper dive into those minimum contract signings, right? Gary Trent, Torian Prince, DeLon Wright. So we talked about Gary Trent before, right? We're over the course of the offseason where he was a free agent. He opted out of his player option, ended up being one of those guys that just couldn't, get any traction in free agency, right? He didn't get, nobody signed him. Nobody wanted to sign him, I guess, for whatever reason, for the amount he was looking for. And so he had to take a minimum contract, right? Obviously, for his career, 14 points, 2 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 42 from the field, 39 from three. So that's cool. That's cool, right? So we know he can shoot. We know he can defend. How do you feel like he slides into the starting two guard spot? I know we kind of already talked about it, but I mean, do you kind of expect, him to have, I don't know if a career year is the case, but what kind of year do you expect him to have? What kind of an impact do you actually expect him to have with Milwaukee? Because again, we've talked about him before, but this is going to be the first time in a while that he's going to be on a team with real expectations. Because I mean, he was on Portland, right? But I think when Portland was a playoff team, he didn't really play a whole lot. And then, he was in Toronto, and Toronto's expectations post Kawhi have just not really been that high. So, what do you think? Because, he's a guy that puts up solid numbers, but, do you feel like he's as good as advertised? Or is it just it doesn't really matter because it's a minimum contract, which is probably closer to the real answer anyways?
I mean, I think it's a mix of both, but if we're talking optimistically, I think this will be one of those years where it's a bounce back for him. It'll be more consolidated, more defined, I feel like. I'm not
Mhm.
saying, like he's going to be like KCP or anything like that, but kind of expect him to be asked to do similar things that KCP was asked to do in LA and Denver. Guard a lot of, great ball handlers, great offensive players while also being a viable option on the 3-point line as a shooter
Right.
for Milwaukee, because I think that's what they need, and that was a topic of conversation when Giannis kind of first started blossoming, was surround this guy with some awesome shooters. And I think they've continued to do that. It's just now, it's more so about defense. So I think, in terms of carrying the load defensively, I think he'll be able to hold his own, but I don't know if that's going to translate into good team defense, if that makes sense, if I'm making any sense.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, he's better defensively than Malik Beasley,
Mm-hmm.
but is that going to be the difference between them being, a high level defense versus what they were last year?
No.
And again, like the second half of the season, they were better, but it still wasn't enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in the playoffs, it didn't really look like a great defensive team to me. But to be fair, there was no Giannis, so you don't even really want to look at that,
Yeah.
as proof of concept. It's
Yeah.
just not fair,
Yeah.
I don't think. And then obviously the last two guys, Torian Prince, DeLon Wright. I guess, you're the Wizards guy, right? Obviously, DeLon Wright was on your team, right? We know he's the deflections wizard, no pun intended.
Yep.
But what do you think of this signing, right? Because he kind of fell off the map, I think, for a while, right? Where he was with the Raptors as a backup guard, played well, and then left, and then, has kind of played for some other random teams since then. But I think, in the minutes he's played, the opportunities he's gotten, he's looked solid. I know with the Wizards, I think he got hurt, so he didn't really get a chance to play a whole lot. But what do you think?
I mean, he's floated around, and what I've seen from him, very good defensively. In terms of what he's able to do, he's just a pest. He bothers people. Can get in the grill, get steals, obviously deflections and stops and things of that nature. So yeah, adding a guy like that who's kind of got that innate ability to just hustle and be a great defender and use that to his ability, or to the best of his ability, is awesome. and I think he was on the Heat, if I'm not mistaken, last year or something like that. But here he
Yeah,
is
he
now
was.
on another good team in the East, and I think that kind of speaks to his value. Um, and this is kind of something that I guess you could say the Bucks need because among losing Malik Beasley, they also lost Pat Bev. So bringing back or bringing DeLon Wright in kind of gives you a little bit of Pat Bev and what he's able to do. It's just I think the question about DeLon Wright is offensively. When he's out there, he takes a little bit of a dip just because that's just the name of the game, and he's not a great offensive player, but defensively, I think he's amazing. And then
Right.
Torian Prince.
Mm-hmm.
If you want me to be real, that's
Mm-hmm.
probably the one that I'm the lowest on, which is okay,
Mm-hmm.
I think. But regardless, he brings shooting, which kind of goes back to what I was talking about with
Yeah.
surrounding, Giannis and even Dame with viable shooters to
Right.
space that floor. And
And
think about it, like
yeah.
it always amazes me how Brook Lopez evolved into a stretch big kind of guy,
Right.
where it's like I always thought he was like a face up, back to the
Yeah.
basket kind of big, and he
Right.
turned into one of the better stretch bigs in the game.
Yeah.
So
And he's become much better defensively as a shot blocker too, because that was where he was criticized early in his career.
sure,
Because nobody cared about him not being able to shoot threes
right,
back then. That just you didn't. Nobody was really looking for that out of their
right,
centers.
right.
But
It's just
like you
interesting
said,
though, being on the
yeah,
Bucks and being with guys like Giannis and Dame, bring in shooters, shoot 3-and-D. 3-and-D should be the name of the game with this team, and they accomplished that to the best of their ability based on the
right,
restrictions that were given to them. That's why, I labeled them as having a smart offseason, smart
yeah.
shot block.
Yeah. Again, you swapped out basically three guys, right?
Yeah.
Like you replaced Patrick Beverly with DeLon Wright. You replaced Jay Crowder with Torian Prince, and you replaced Gallinari with Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah.
So I feel like those are upgrades, right?
They are.
Like even if you feel like those are marginal upgrades, they're still upgrades because
Yeah.
those are solid NBA players, right? Because even like Torian Prince, I know people made fun of him, but he had a good year for the
Yes,
Lakers.
he
Like the
did. Yeah.
problem for him was like the role that he was in, where
Sure.
he's the starting forward
Yeah, the
next to
load, it was a little bit too
next
much.
next to D'Lo and Austin, and he
Yeah.
was playing like almost 30 minutes a game. Like
Yeah, a
he's
little
just,
bit too much.
I don't, yeah, like I don't think he's not gonna have that type of role for Milwaukee. Like he won't even start, right?
No.
Like, and maybe they put him at the 2 next to Lillard, but probably not.
No.
You know what I mean? So defensive personnel, I guess for the Bucks, like in a way, is it better? I mean, like AD is really good defensively, but then after that, you don't have much. But, for the Bucks, you got Giannis and Lopez, so that's cool. But I think it's just more so like he's a solid NBA player. Like there's things he's gonna do that are gonna annoy Bucks fans, I'm sure,
Yeah.
at different points, right? As a Lakers fan, I can attest to that. But I think it's more positives than negatives, right? Like it is a guy that is a legitimately solid NBA player, and they were able to add more of those. But I just feel like the problem is also I just think the core may just not be enough to win the title.
Yeah,
Like
100%.
you said, it may be good enough to be a powerhouse in the East, but you still have to be able to win the whole thing. And like I don't know, because like I mean, who do they match up? What type of teams do they match up well against? Do you feel like?
That's a good question.
Because I feel like the Celtics, like obviously there are teams that I think will be tougher, right? Like I think teams that can kind of punish you inside, I think more, right? I think could be more of a problem for a team like Boston, right? Where, especially if there's not really like a guy that Porzingis can kind of just ignore. But say for the Bucks, it's a different type of team. So like what type of team do we feel like is a problem for, Milwaukee? We kind of mentioned Boston because of the wings, right? Again, we haven't seen it in the postseason, you know, but at the same time, I feel like you can just kind of see the makeup of. I don't know if the Bucks have anybody that could slow down Tatum or Brown. To be fair, I don't know if the Celtics have a Giannis stopper, but
well, it's interesting because I feel like in the West, they might
mhm.
be actually legitimately cooked. They
You
went.
don't think they can beat anybody out west?
I don't think they could be anybody out West, and that might be a hot take, but in the regular season last year, they went 15-15 against the West. Not too good
Right.
against the Northwest Division. Not okay against Pacific, but definitely not good against Southwest. Granted, you do kind of have to look at when these games did happen and occur.
Right.
But even in the East, like they did unironically do pretty well in the Atlantic Division. And
Yeah.
Southeast, obviously. Southeast, don't even get me started on that. But Central is where they struggled. So that was their own division. But
Division, yeah.
I mean, I guess
And
I
that's
feel
because of Cleveland, because I think they got
yeah,
skunked by
yeah,
Cleveland for
yes.
most of the time they played.
Yeah. So I feel like, I don't think they match up
And
against
Indiana, of
Boston.
course, as well. Who could forget that?
Yeah, I think they're gonna match up well against probably maybe a team like I don't know because
Yeah, I feel like if it's a slower paced team, then they could probably match up
I mean
with them.
maybe Orlando. I don't
Yeah,
know.
like Orlando. I feel like any team that plays kind of a slower style of game, I think the Bucks could probably be relatively fine against because you don't have to, because if it's a slower paced team, it's probably not a team that has a ton of athletes,
Yeah,
or a ton of speed, right?
but
But
even
if it's a
then, like think about New York though, because in New York they play
right,
a slower pace, but
right,
can they contain Brunson? I don't think they could.
right, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, and again, like with the Knicks, like they have a pretty versatile, switchable team. Now, I mean, the Knicks, the issue for them is they don't have a lot of center depth, so that could be a problem, possibly.
Oh yeah,
You
Giannis is
know,
gonna have a field day.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that could possibly be an issue, right? But I don't know. I just feel like if it's a slower paced team, that might be better for them, just because of the fact that they're not going to be forced to run up and down and have to play transition defense, and contain the backboards and all that. But uh, that's my point. Whereas like a fast paced team, I think might be more of a problem. I mean, to be fair, like in the playoffs, you don't get as many of those run and gun opportunities anyways,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of the funny thing about Indiana is that like even though obviously they play a very fast style of play, they still have a pretty good half court offense. So,
Very good
you know,
actually.
that's one of the reasons why, the Bucks struggle against them is because they don't really have much of an answer for them either way.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. Again, I just don't I feel like those minimum contract signings are good and it'll make them better. But is it enough to go from what they were last year to a title team? I'm not sure. And again, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that the injuries made them look worse than they actually were, right? But I just feel like regular season wise, I don't think I saw enough, even when they were healthy, for me to believe that it was a championship team. And I know regular season is different from postseason, but I feel like if you want to win the title, you got to win over 50 games, right?
Yeah,
Because I mean, we
agreed.
haven't seen a team win less than, I think, even like 53 or so, right, in
Mm.
order to win a title. You know what I mean? Like I think that's kind of the benchmark, right? Because if you go back and look, obviously the Celtics won 64, right? So they cleared it. The Nuggets, right, the year they won the title, 53-29. The Warriors were 53-29. The Bucks, obviously that was a shortened season, so that's a little bit different. They went 46-26, right? But I mean, that's still, well over 60% of their games, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, 46 out of 72, that's like 64%. So and then before that, right, the Lakers were 56 and 17. Or not, excuse me, that was the Bucks, my bad. The Lakers were, if we look, they were 52 and 19, which, so that's ridiculous, right? I mean, and that was 71 games.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at it. Like you got to at least win somewhere around. I mean, the Raptors 58-24. Now they had injury luck, to be fair, but that's still a really good record, right? And then obviously the KD Warriors 58 the second year, 67 the year before. You got to win at least 53 games. I think if you don't get to that, I feel like it's going to be tougher. But to be fair, the league is a lot better now, so it may be a little bit tougher to get there. But then it's going to make those championship teams stand out even more, right? Like
Yeah.
in the Western Conference, you still had a lot of teams that won. I mean, almost everybody that was a playoff team won around 50 games, right? But then if you go all the way, to the top of the Western Conference, you had, those Nuggets and the Thunder win 57, and the Wolves won 56.
Yeah.
right? Now the Mavs went to the finals, right? They won 50. So that's a little bit different. But like I said, the Celtics won the title and they won 64.
Yeah.
So, do you think that there's a feasible way? I mean, they were one less. They were one win away from 50, and that was the last game of the regular season where they got smoked by Orlando, right? And Giannis didn't play, things like that. But again, clearly, it's got to be even more than 50. So, can they get to 54 wins? You think, or do you think that's probably kind of pushing it?
Too much.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably the case.
Yeah, too much. East is way too competitive now, and they didn't get too much better. Like you look at the other teams in the East, there's a couple of teams there that I think are a little bit better than them now. But I will say this about the Bucks. This is my final point on them. I think they're the spoiler team. Whoever
Dark horse.
Yeah, like
they've become a dark horse now. That's nuts.
I think they're the spoiler though. Like in all seriousness, whoever they play in the first round, if it's a super competitive team, they better watch out. That's all I'm gonna say on them because I feel like I said, I feel like Giannis is gonna have one of those reminder seasons where it's like, this is a top 3, arguably top 1 player in the NBA right now. So. Just a reminder that's kind of what I'm gonna.
Yeah, before Jokic, he was considered the guy, the best player in the NBA.
It's been a roulette. I think ever since the new guys have kind of started winning titles, except for this year, with the Celtics. I don't think anybody thinks Jason Tatum's the best player in the NBA, but with Giannis and Jokic, it's definitely been kind of rotating here and there. Like, even like Curry, like people thought Curry was the best player in the NBA once they won the 2022 title. Like, it's ridiculous. Like the recency bias does happen. Yeah.
I remember, I think it was Bobby Marks maybe, where I think he said something along the lines of like, Steph Curry could be like the second best player ever or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't
even considered him the GOAT.
Wow, yeah, because I remember some of those. I don't remember people saying he was the best player, but like you said, I think recency bias is always a thing, right? Because like there were people before, because there were people before the Nuggets won the title that said Jokic was the best player.
Sure.
After they won the title, then it was basically universal, and then everybody thought that they were going to be the next dynasty.
Yeah, and then that didn't happen. I can't wait till we get to that offseason breakdown. It's going to be hilarious.
Right. Yeah, and that's the crazy thing about, and now say like with Boston, right? What type of recency bias are we going to see for them, right? Because like you said, now you're still not really seeing people say Jason Tatum's the best player in the NBA. People don't even think he's a top 5 player.
They don't even think he's the best player on his own team, which is criminal to me, but the
Celtics may be the exception for recency bias because I mean pretty much
that's what I was saying.
Yeah, because pretty much every other team, that has won the title was able to benefit from either a player or the team. Because really the main thing for Steph that helped him was once they won that title, right? Then it kind of eliminated the arguments that some people made, when they were trying to compare him and Durant, right? Because now it's like he's got 2 on his own, 2 as the best player. Now he has a Finals MVP. I think that was kind of the main recency bias that helped him, right? Like helped elevate him in that regard. But we haven't seen. I mean, what have we seen elevate Boston,
bro? We haven't I'm not gonna lie. Every single thing that I've seen on Boston post title, outside of Celtics media and people that cover the Celtics, has been negativity galore. I mean, in all honesty, they accomplished so much. They won the title. They have all these guys on Team USA, but then it's like Jaylen Brown isn't on Team USA, so it sucks. It's like, bro, holy moly, it's been negativity 24/7.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a Celtics fan because I'm a Laker fan, but it's like
me neither.
Still got to suck it up and give them props, but to be fair, I'm still mad about that being my preseason pick and then changing it.
Yeah.
That's what makes it worse. Mm-hmm. So I can't even take credit for it. I can take credit for picking them to win in the finals, but whoop-de-doo. I wish I could have taken credit for both.
Yeah, and that was in the finals. I mean, that was clear-cut and obvious. I feel like I
felt like we were on an island. I know Vegas had them as the favorites, the Celtics, But like in terms of analysts, it was different. But
You're right.
we don't
You're
have.
right. And
Yeah.
and and the general NBA populace.
Yeah.
That was a
Our
funny
comments
time.
let us
That
know.
was
Our
a
comments let
funny
us know.
time. Our comments
Yeah.
were going crazy. I mean, it went from Mavs in 4 to Mavs in 5 to Mavs in 6 to Mavs in 7. I was
Left
like,
in 7.
what are we doing? What are
Yeah,
we
even when they were down
doing?
3-0.
That's
Like,
my
I mean,
point.
yeah, like just because a team has come back from down 3-1 doesn't mean everybody's gonna do it. Like, I mean,
Right. That's
like
a
we had to do with that last year, I think, because I remember like in the playoffs, like teams were down 3-1, and not from us, but I remember seeing online people were
yeah.
like, and online isn't necessarily real life, but even like on shows and podcasts, like a team would be up 3-1, and then people would be like, the series isn't over, and like, yeah, technically it's not over, but like it's
It's
not gonna
over,
happen.
bro. It's
You know
over.
what I mean? Yeah, like I think because we had multiple series where teams went up 3-1, right? Like it was like Lakers against Golden State, Lakers against the Grizzlies. Who else was it? It was like Nuggets and well, I guess they were up 3-0 against the Lakers, but
Yeah.
or 3-1 against the Heat as
Yeah.
well. Like the only one where like it was getting kind of scary was Heat Celtics. That was
Sure.
the only one.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's
But
valid.
yeah. But now going into some news rumors, not a ton, but a few things to, I guess, kind of discuss. So the Pelicans waived Matt Ryan and then re-signed him to a restructured 1-year deal, right? So obviously
Woohoo!
he'll be coming back to New Orleans. 13 minutes a night, over 28 games. 5 points a game, not a lot, but did shoot 45% from three. Hey, the Pelicans have had some solid signings over the course of the offseason. Still don't really love their center rotation, and we'll get into them when we get there. But again, he's a guy that was already on the roster, so just kind of bringing back the chemistry, right? Remember
Yeah.
the story, right? It was the DoorDash guy, and now he's, been able to not just be on an NBA roster, but stick.
Yeah,
So
wasn't
that's
he
the
on the Lakers at one point?
yeah.
Is that okay?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the same guy.
He
Yeah,
was I think he was a Celtics guy. I don't remember if he was G League or not. And then they waived him. Then he went to LA. Then he
gotcha.
was able to kind of stick there. Then eventually they waived him.
Yeah,
And then obviously he kind of bounced around and now he's back on New Orleans.
yeah. I mean, I feel like if you're a shooter in the NBA, that's so valuable at this point because look at the influx of non-shooters that came into the league this year and have in the past couple of years. The guys who are raw and super athletic, yeah, they're super valuable. But I feel like the pure shooters and the guys that shoot that three ball like 40+% are super duper
Right.
valuable. So congrats to him.
Yeah. And for the regular season, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
According to The Athletic, Brandon Pajemski, Warriors GM, told me I wouldn't be traded amid marketing rumors. Also, the Warriors want him to shoot 8 to 10 3-pointers a game for next season. So obviously, right after coming off a pretty stellar rookie season, right? And obviously, reportedly, right, they didn't want to give him up for Lauri Markkanen. So, now you gotta, you're kind of expecting, a big season for this guy, right? Because obviously now Clay's gone. So presumably the minutes are now open for him to be the full-time starter as opposed to sometime starter that plays a lot. Just kind of interesting, right? Because obviously 9 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, so a lot of versatility to his game. We talked about it. We knew he was going to get drafted there. Go back and look at the mock drafts. We're not lying. Just go back and look if you want. And we knew that was going to be a good pick for them, and he's good. He's 21. But I don't know. Do we feel like the expectations may be starting to be raised a little bit too high, or do you expect him to have a big year next year?
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. Thinking about it now, after the 60 seconds that just passed by,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's realistic. He put up like 20 plus points in college.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's doable. Is it gonna be efficient? Is it gonna detract from Steph? Probably. That's why I kind of raised my eyebrows when you said 8 to 10 3-pointers. I don't
Right.
know.
And just because they say that doesn't mean that's the case. Because Darvin
Sure.
Ham, AD needs to take like 6, 7 threes a game.
Yeah.
Frank Vogel said that too, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
You got to be able to make them. But to be
Yes.
fair, Pods I think can make them at a good clip.
Yeah, Pods is good. I think he's awesome. Am I expecting him to have a big season? I guess, yeah, but big season for him is not big season for other guys, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm expecting him to look more like a starter than a
Right.
young bench guy, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm not expecting
I think-
all-star or anything like that.
Right. Because his progression may look a little bit different because he's not like a 19-year-old,
Right.
he won the 19-year-old rookie. For him, you know, he may, and I'm not saying he is, but like he might be one of those guys where maybe he might be a little bit closer to his ceiling. And
Sure.
like you said, he might look more like, okay, this guy, has added a little bit, more, or maybe, he's become
Yeah.
a little better in certain areas versus like a guy that's like here and then goes up here, here, here. Like I don't
Yeah.
know what his ceiling is as a player, but I don't know. I don't feel like it's like an all-star plus, but I feel like he's a good player. But I also just kind of worry that, you know, the message to the fans is that we didn't get Lauri Markkanen, but we almost kind of have a Lauri Markkanen light right here, at home. We got this
Yeah.
guy.
That doesn't
So
instill a lot of faith in me. Or yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
yeah,
That's weird
right.
messaging. I don't like that.
Yeah, and just some additional Warriors news right today, right? Obviously you're watching this on Friday, right? But as of Thursday, right, Steph, according to Woj, signed a $62.6 million extension of 1 year extra deal to stay with Warriors through 2026, 2027. Not really a surprise, I don't think, right? Just given the fact that, again, with the new CBA, you kind of have to keep these guys and kind of resign, that if you can, right? Especially because, even though he's not, quite the same guy anymore, he's still, right, one of the best players in the NBA. And, I think he's still one of those guys that when the going gets tough can still, win you, those high level games. But, obviously the reason why it's just 1 year is because much past that, over 38 rule. So you can't give a guy, a long extension, a type contract, past that age. That happened with Harden. So, again, it makes sense because he's their franchise guy. He's the guy that's basically kind of built that team, built that organization. I know they won, a couple titles before him, but, you will never think of the Golden State Warriors without Steph, obviously. So, you're paying to keep him around. I don't know what that means from a Steph Curry Warriors perspective. Maybe it might just be, 3 years and then that's it. Not necessarily that he retires, but maybe just more so like we'll see what we can do for the next few years. Because I don't really think there's a whole lot they can do just because of the fact that, who's left at this point. This may just be one of those transitional seasons for them. I know that people like a lot of the signings they had, but I just don't think it's going to be enough to really make a difference in the Western Conference. But obviously, we'll talk about that more in detail once we get to the Warriors offseason.
Yeah, it's kind of dope to really see this stuff.
No brainer deal.
Yeah, like you said, no brainer, but historical nonetheless. Fourth player along with LeBron, Paul George,
Mm-hmm.
and Kevin Durant to surpass $500 million in career earnings. Awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Elite company, like you said, put the Warriors organization on the map, and I think really revolutionized the three ball to where it is now in the
Mm-hmm.
league. So shout
Yeah.
out to him for obviously getting the well-deserved bag, and like you said, no-brainer move, and it only really makes sense due to the over 38 rule.
Right. And then Ty Lue was quoted, I believe, you know, in the Olympics, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so he told ESPN in an interview, he basically said, "quote When you lose a guy of Paul George's stature, instantly people think, oh, they can't win. I can't wait to prove everybody wrong. I don't think you're going to be able to prove people wrong. I don't think the Clippers are going to be that great of a team next season. I'm not saying they're going to miss the playoffs or anything like that, but I don't see them being a legitimate contender. I just, I think the additions they made in free agency are fine, but I just feel like they're going to take a step back."
Yeah, agreed. I think the Clippers, you still got Claw, you still got Kawhi, but
Right.
is that enough? No, especially considering who is on that roster. It's not amazing. Like I feel like we're
Right.
probably gonna get an interesting Harden season
Mm-hmm.
and probably your typical run of the mill Kawhi season, but outside of
Right.
that,
Assuming he's healthy.
yeah, throw the championship aspirations out the window, please.
If Kawhi doesn't play the amount of games he played last season,
It's GG.
they probably are going to miss the playoffs.
Yeah, it's GG.
And then last but not least, the Celtics are going, have agreed to an Exhibit 10 deal with Lonnie Walker, right? This one was kind of surprising considering this was a guy, right, who just a couple seasons ago right? Well, even last season, he was on the Nets. And then the year before, he was on the Lakers, right? And that was regarded as a terrible signing. And he ended up winning a playoff game for them, right? So, we remember that. We went on a live stream and talked about it. I don't think we did it after that game, but I remember recording a regular episode, and then obviously we talked about it after they were eliminated, the Warriors, I mean. But just kind of surprising that, it's another guy where, and I didn't expect him to ever get like a ton of money, but I'm just kind of surprised that like a guy who's at least kind of a proven, at least a relatively proven NBA player at this point, was kind of forced to not even a minimum, but an Exhibit 10 deal,
Yeah.
right? So that basically means, we're bringing you into training camp. Maybe if you make it, you'll get on the roster, and if you don't, maybe the G League. Not that he'll, I don't know if he'll take a G League thing, but just saying, just kind of a surprising, deal. I understand he's not a perfect player, but I mean, like I feel like he's shown enough that he could probably be on an NBA roster. But to be fair, he was out of the Nets rotation during the latter part of the season, and it wasn't due to injury. So maybe there's just something that I don't really know about.
Yeah, I mean it is interesting. A 10-day contract is crazy. You know, I mean I feel like he's better than that. If you want me to be real,
Exhibit 10.
yeah. I think he's better than that. If you want me to be honest, I think he deserves a roster spot. It kind of just goes back to what we were saying about some other high quality players who are just asking for a lot of money, and I feel like, or not even like a lot of money, just I guess a lot of money in terms of the CBA, and it's
Yeah, I
like,
think teams are trying to be cautious.
yeah, teams are being super cautious about the CBA stuff, rightfully so. I mean, just look at the penalties that you that can incur when you go over certain
Yeah,
limits, and I feel like teams just aren't willing to do that, even if it will help their roster in the
right.
here and now. Down the line, you might be kicking yourself for signing somebody like that.
Yeah, like you're not gonna be willing to go into the first or second luxury tax for Gary Trent Jr.
Right,
or
Tyus
Lonnie Walker
Jones,
or
freaking
Tyus Jones. Yeah, like it's those teams don't feel like it's worth it. But that may open up. Hey, there's a random good player for the minimum that we can bring in. And if he makes the actual Celtics roster, I mean that's a solid 15th roster spot. I don't know how many minutes he would get on this Celtics team. But, at his best, that's a solid score you can have, off the bench. And I mean, he started for a decent chunk of the Lakers season. I mean,
yeah,
they weren't that great of a team, when he was starting, but it wasn't really because of him, right? That was because, you had, you know, three smallish guards, kind of playing next to each other next to LeBron and AD,
yeah.
who weren't always there during the earlier part of the season.
Yeah, I think he could be a good rotational guy for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, again, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Let us know your thoughts about the Milwaukee Bucks offseason. Do you like what they've done? Are your expectations about this team higher or lower than they were? Again, just shout out to people that continue to watch our content, both the shorts, and long form content, right? Because, again, even during this part of the NBA offseason where not really anything is going on, we're still seeing, some solid viewership, right, for some of our videos. And we always love the comments and interactions, because it lets us know we're doing something right, especially, regardless of, whatever attention it is. But, either way, we appreciate all that. So continue to look out for our content. Like, subscribe, hit that bell to get those notifications, and help us reach our goal of 500 subs. And we'll see you next episode.